So there's a lot of neoliberal hacks that constantly defend the Democratic Party establishment's corruption, and since they don't actually have a cohesive counter-argument to progressives, who are basically contending that we think the party should move in a more grassroots-oriented direction, well, what do they do instead? Well, when they're not hiding behind identity politics, they simply try to smear progressives and label us as racist, sexist Bernie bros. But a new smear they really like to use against progressives is alt-left. So, for example, Joy Reid tweeted that alt-left is the perfect descriptor for progressives, and she recently dismissed criticism Kamala Harris received from progressives like Numiki Konst, Roseanne DeMoro, and Winnie Wong because they're, quote, alt-left activists. So since they're supposedly alt-left, whatever that means, what they have to say just doesn't matter, so you can disregard it. But Joy Reid isn't alone because her good friend Joan Walsh recently argued that the alt-left and alt-right were actually converging, perhaps a reference to horseshoe theory, which is popular among neoliberal hacks, and also, Joan Walsh referred to the alt-left as liars. Now, they're both not alone here because Neera Tanden and other neoliberal talking heads also use this term to describe progressives, but not as much as Joy Reid and Joan Walsh. Now, the question is, what exactly does alt-left mean? Well, the answer is nothing. It means nothing, because alt-right is a term that white supremacists use to rebrand themselves and make them more appealing to ordinary Americans, whereas alt-left is a term that neoliberal hacks use to discredit progressives and equate them with alt-right people who are white supremacists. So again, they're comparing white supremacists and neo-Nazis with progressives who simply want Medicare for all and want economic equality. They want you to think that by calling progressives alt-left, well, maybe they're akin to the alt-right, because they already call us racist, sexist Bernie bros, so I mean, of course it's the case that they may be a lot like the alt-right as well, according to them. So this alt-left term is nothing more than another disingenuous attempt to smear progressives, but recently, to the dismay of neoliberal hacks, someone that they hate decided to appropriate their term.
What about the alt-left that came charging at the, as you say, the alt-right?
Alt-left.
So by punching left and deciding to immorally smear progressives, Joy Reid and Joan Walsh just handed Donald Trump this huge gift. He was given a new way to smear progressives and equate them to the alt-right, who is an increasing wing of the Republican Party. Now, if you were expecting Joy Reid and Joan Walsh to get away with this, well, you probably weren't alone, because they constantly berate progressives all the time and smear progressives, and they're never called out by anyone else in the mainstream media. However, recently, someone else who is another pundit actually decided to call them out.
Finally, the Democratic Party's civil war. You may recall that during last year's presidential primaries, there was a battle between centrist Democrats led by Hillary Clinton and progressives led by Bernie Sanders. The Sanders movement fought for universal health care and free education. The Clinton Democrats defended free market liberalism, even though it works for an increasingly small number of people. During the fight, several prominent Clinton Democrats smeared the Sanders crowd, calling them rabid and unhinged Bernie bros. Some Clinton Democrats even referred to these progressives as alt-left. It's an insult, unlike alt-right, which white supremacists coined to give their old movement a modern edge. Also, unlike alt-right, alt-left does not strive for an ethno-state. It is explicitly anti-racist. The alt-left simply demands the redistribution of wealth. And yet, some Democrats who feel threatened by that have promoted the canard that the alt-left as a group is now looking for violence. It may not be surprising that President Trump would label the left wing as a group of hooligans, but when Democrats buy into the term, they cause real damage to their party, and they do the right a favor. Instead of labeling progressive activists with a slur, centrist Democrats would do better to own up to their own failures in language and in policy.
That was absolutely excellent. So that right there was David Shuster, who is a former MSNBC host, and everything he said there was spot on, but that wasn't all. So he actually took to Twitter to call on Joan Walsh and Joy Reid to, quote, apologize for smearing progressives with the alt-left slur. Now, Joy Reid responded by saying, Dear, wake me up when you take issue with those calling anyone who won't worship with them neoliberals and attacking people, especially women of color. Okay, first of all, this gets under my skin. Neoliberal is a real word. Alt-left is not a real word. One's a real word. That is not a smear, it's just a descriptor that's actually quite accurate for you. And another is a smear, alt-left, which means nothing. So you can't equate the two and say that what we're doing is akin to you smearing us. Are you not someone who constantly stands up for the Democratic Party and defends their push for free market capitalistic policies? Because if so, you're a neoliberal. That's all that means. Neoliberal is only a smear to you because it's grown increasingly unpopular since neoliberalism has led to economic inequality. But since now that word has negative connotations, well, you think that you can just chalk it up as a smear when it's not a smear. If you don't want to be called a neoliberal, then start arguing for more socialist-oriented policies. Until then, we will continue to refer to you as a neoliberal, Joy, because that's exactly what you are. It's an accurate descriptor, unlike the term you made up to smear progressives, which means nothing. Now, of course, Joan Walsh also responded to David, saying, David, you don't get it. Neither Joy nor I have to take orders from you. I know you think that's your role, though. A lot of men do. So predictably, Joan Walsh implied that he was sexist, and Joy Reid implied that he was racist. So this is exactly what I expected from them. Honestly, I would expect nothing more from Joan Walsh and Joy Reid. But like a lot of us, David Shuster is on to their bullshit. And the next clip is just glorious because he decided to actually call them out on their bullshit.
Last week, I noted that centrist Democratic pundits who supported Hillary Clinton smeared progressives with the slur alt-left long before President Donald Trump ever did. On social media, one of those pundits suggested my criticism was driven by sexism. The other suggested it was racism. That should tell you all you need to know about Joan Walsh and Joy Reid. Instead of acknowledging the failures of the neoliberalism they support or addressing progressive alternatives, these pundits deflect and engage in identity politics, and it's shameful. Let this be a lesson to all progressives. Many corporate Democratic pundits do not care about your interests or policies. They do not want to acknowledge economic realities or address the hard truths about free market liberalism. Instead, they want to keep the Democratic establishment going, and they will hide behind race and gender if that will keep any criticism at bay. Beware of these Democrats who say they want to help the less fortunate. They actually care most about protecting themselves.
Damn. So look, I'm really enjoying this because this is really, I think, the first time that Joan Walsh and Joy Reid has been called out by anyone. I mean, those of us on, YouTube, David Dole, myself, Kyle Kalinske, we call out Joan Walsh and Joy Reid regularly, but no one of this level has actually called them out. I mean, David Shuster was a former MSNBC host. So the fact that he's actually speaking out with his large platform, this really does shed light on their slimy tactics. But he still wasn't done because he tweeted this video to both Joy Reid and Joan Walsh, calling their, quote, deflection shameful and absurd, to which Joan responded saying, David, exclamation, go to bed, this is silly, you can't resurrect your career on our backs. Although it seems like he kind of did. But he ended with Joan, my career is great. Global channel, real news, though I'm lowering myself to mention you, but keep deflecting, makes my point. I don't like to use this term, but I'm going to use this term. Joan Walsh and Joy Reid got owned by David Shuster. And again, I really tried to refrain, but I don't think there's any way to describe this situation. He handed them their ass on a silver platter, and all the smears that they've been using against progressives for years, it came back to bite them directly in the ass, and it was so glorious. So this is definitely my favorite story of the week because David Shuster, who knew that he was such a savage? I mean, he called them on their bullshit once and for all. And look, really, they should apologize for using the term alt-left, but they were not apologetic whatsoever. And they are helping Donald Trump when they are supposedly the resistance to Donald Trump, so I just find it hilarious. But look, this isn't the first time that Donald Trump has appropriated a term by a neoliberal, because Hillary Clinton was the individual that first coined the term fake news. And guess who uses it now more than anybody? Trump. And you could bet that that wasn't the last time he used the alt-left slur against anyone on the left he dislikes. So congratulations to Joan Walsh and Reid. You gave Donald Trump a gigantic gift when you're supposed to be the resistance. But nonetheless, I'm just glad that finally someone with a big enough voice in media decided to call you out on your nonsense.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.